Nostalgia is like a really bad drug, because although it can give you positive feelings and make you feel good, deep down you know it's bad for your health and it's killing you on the inside. Now, I'm sure what I'm saying sounds very dramatic and over the top for a lot of people, but let me explain. But before I do that, it would be helpful to go over what nostalgia actually is and what it means. So, according to the Oxford Dictionary, nostalgia is defined as a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. Now, I know for a fact that everybody watching this video has experienced nostalgia many times throughout their life. And in a lot of cases, it's very incidental. You don't intend to feel nostalgia, it just comes up. Maybe one day you find yourself walking down the old neighborhood, or you run into a friend that you haven't seen in 10 years. All of a sudden, those old memories that you've kept inside the back of your mind for all these years, they come back to you. And reliving those old memories inside your head, they make you feel good. Oh my god, life was so great back then. I had so many great friends back then. My great Aunt Gertrude was still alive and life was just so great. Great. Alright. But then all of a sudden, those warm, happy, fond feelings of the past transform into sadness and grief and dejection as you start to realize that you will never be able to truly return to the past. All of your old friends that you always hang out with after school every day, the old squad is never going to reunite because over time, we all drift away. We move to different cities, follow different paths in life, and those paths will probably never cross again. And it's sad to think about that. And it gets even sadder when you think about all the people that you lost. Friends and family that not only drifted apart, but are no longer with us on this earth. And those feelings of grief eventually turn into guilt. Because as you're looking back and thinking about the people you've lost in your life, you not only look back into the past to remember the great times you had together, but you also look back at what you could have done differently. And to help you guys understand what I'm talking about here, I'm going to use a personal example. I'm going to talk about my grandmother, who I mentioned in previous videos because her death was a defining moment in my life. She died on May 2nd, 2009, which was the day before my 11th birthday. And I remember being very traumatized by her death because before that point in my life, I was pretty much shielded from many of the negative things in life, including death. I didn't lose a family member really before she died. I guess I understood what death was because when I heard that she died, I was just immediately devastated and I was crying and I was just an emotional wreck. But it was still such a difficult thing to comprehend and process because I'd never gone through it before. And she also died suddenly, so I didn't have time to really prepare myself for what was to come because it just happened. It's like one day she was perfectly fine and healthy, and the next day, she was gone forever. So not only was the loss difficult in and of itself because she was like a second mother to me, and I loved her so much, but it was also having to come to terms with the concept of death. And even though I'm 22 now, and she's been gone for half of my life at this point, I'm still affected by her loss, and that trauma has never fully dissipated. I still feel it because it's when I'm looking back. It could be the smallest thing. Like, I don't even have to think about her on purpose. It can be something as simple as having a macaroni and cheese dinner. Stouffer's macaroni and cheese, to be more specific. That's the mac and cheese that Grandma always made me because she didn't like to cook in the oven. She wasn't really much of a cook, so she just stuck whatever she had in the microwave, and it was always Stouffer's macaroni and cheese. So whenever I'd come over to her house, that's usually what I'd have to eat. It was that or microwave pancakes, which she would feed me even if it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You know how grandmas are, they love to spoil you. But she's been gone for 11 years now. A few weeks ago, I was eating some Stouffer's macaroni and cheese in the kitchen. And in the middle of eating, all those memories of eating the same mac and cheese at Grandma's house, it came back to me. And it felt like I was being warped back in time because all those feelings of excitement of going to Grandma's house when I was a kid, I felt those feelings again. And although on the surface it seems like a good feeling to have, to go back to a great time in your life, it just reminds me that she's gone, she's dead, and she's never coming back. And I would think about all the times when I was a kid that my parents were doing whatever and they dropped me off at Grandma's for the night, and I would hate it. I would hate having to sleep over at Grandma's because I wanted to sleep in my own bed. It was to the point where I would give my parents a really hard time about sleeping over at Grandma's, and I would beg them to not send me over there because I liked going to Grandma's house, but to stay over for the night, I just didn't like doing that. And sometimes my parents gave in. They said, fine, you don't have to sleep at Grandma's tonight, you can go home. But other times they were like, sorry, but you really have to stay at Grandma's tonight. And I would be at Grandma's house just sulking, acting like I was miserable. and would rather die than sleep over at her house. And at the time I didn't really think much about it. I thought my parents were assholes and that they were making me sleep at grandma's house, and I didn't want to sleep at grandma's. I want to sleep in my own bed. Is that too much to ask? But when she died, when my grandmother died, I started to feel really guilty about that. The fact that I could have enjoyed those moments while they were happening instead of being a little brat. But even now at 22, I look back at those memories and feel nothing but shame and guilt. I'm ashamed that I didn't savor every moment I had with her, and I feel guilty that I didn't show enough appreciation to her and all she's done for me, and show her how much she meant to me. Because now she's gone, and I will never have another chance to tell her how much I love her and how important she really was to me. And it's the shittiest feeling in the world.
The thing about happiness is you only know you had it when it's gone. I mean, you may think to yourself that you're happy, but you don't really believe it. You focus on the petty bullshit or next job or whatever. It's only looking back, by comparison with what comes after, that you really understand that's what happiness felt like.
I remember my first playthrough of Fallout 4 when I first heard this quote. It really moved me. I mean, it's such a powerful quote because it puts your whole life into perspective. It's crazy to think that a video game can have such an impact on you, but for me, that quote in particular, it changed my life. It changed my perspective about life. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how accurate it is about the human mind, and everything I'm feeling, it's just my mind trying to fuck with me. Because there's no logical reason for me to feel so much guilt about not wanting to sleep over at my grandma's house when I was 7. And not just that, but it made me think a lot more about nostalgia in general. The idea of looking back at the past and having all these fond memories about how great things were back in the day. I mean, when I talk to my father and my grandfather, the only thing they talk about are their memories from 30, 40 years ago, and it's kind of annoying. But that's the thing. They're memories. And a memory is a recollection rather than a replication. Memories are usually not accurate representations of what actually happened in the past. They're your own interpretation. And how you remember the past can be wrong. Just think of any memory that you have from the top of your head. It could be a memory of anything. It could be the shit that you took last night. It doesn't matter. I want you to pick up on something. I want you to realize what your brain is doing when they're replaying that memory in your head. Is it a completely accurate picture-to-picture replication of what actually happened when it happened? The answer is no. Your brain is taking at least some artistic liberty when it tries to recreate that past event in your mind. And that's especially true when we're talking about distant memories of things that happened months or years ago. You ever notice that a lot of your old memories are in the third person? That obviously wouldn't happen if your brain was actually storing your memory in your head accurately. So whenever you look back at the past and you think to yourself, man, those were the good old days. Were they really? Did you feel as happy back then as you are now looking back at the past? At least for me, the answer is no. You're seeing gameplay of an old Call of Duty game that I played when I was 13 years old, and now at 22, going back and playing that game again, it brings me back to a time when I was much younger. I'd pop this game in after school every day and have so much fun, and sometimes I think, oh man, life was so much more simple back then. Life was so much better. And if only I can go back to that time, because life sucks ass right now. I hate being an adult. I wish I can go back and be a teenager again, because life was just so perfect back then, right? Not so much. Because sure, that was part of my routine every day after school to go play some Call of Duty and have fun, but there were other days where I'd come home from school in tears because I was bullied, because I didn't fit in and all these hormones were starting to kick in, and it was a shitty feeling. Do I want to go back to that? Hell no. But for some reason, my brain picks and chooses which parts of my life that it wants to remember, and it only chooses the positive. Even going back just 3 years ago, which is 2017, I remember being miserable every second of every day to the point where I actually contemplated suicide, and I didn't make an attempt, but it was pretty bad. I was really close to just going through with it. I'm like, fuck it, I don't want to live in this world anymore, and I just find no enjoyment out of life. That's how I felt a few years ago. But for some reason, when I relive those memories of the past, I only remember the good times, like hanging out with my friends and doing whatever. For some reason, now I look back at those times with fondness, with happiness. even though that was probably one of the worst times in my life, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's weird how the brain works, right? But that's the thing about nostalgia. It acts like a really powerful drug that kind of alters your mindset and takes you away from reality. Because if you think about it, people take drugs to escape the real world, to escape their responsibilities and just feel good. And with nostalgia, that's kind of similar in a much lesser scale, obviously. You can die of a heroin overdose, but you can't die of a nostalgia overdose. There's obviously no such thing. But when we're talking about nostalgia, when you're on a nostalgia trip, what are you doing? You're escaping the present and running away from the future by living in the past. Because the past is a lot more comforting than the present and the future, because the future is unknown and the present just sucks, while the past is the past. It already happened, and because it already happened, there's a lot more mental security when looking back at the past than, let's say, trying to think ahead in the future. And in the context of video games, I think that's why remakes and remasters are so palatable to so many gamers, because they want to be able to relive that past time in their life. And playing old video games is a really good way to trigger that nostalgia, because in a way, it's not just a memory that fades over time. You actually are reliving the past, because the game hasn't changed. It's the same game. Maybe you want better graphics and better visuals or whatever, but ultimately, it's almost a perfect recreation of what you experienced all those years ago. From the story and the gameplay and everything else, you are playing exactly what you played when you were a kid, when you were a teenager, whatever. It's a great way to connect your past self to your present self, because you are playing, you are experiencing exactly what you experienced when you were younger. And for a lot of people, that's very powerful, because instead of having to rely on faded memories, you actually get to relive it by replaying those old games. Which is also why I feel like the retro gaming community is so active, because it literally connects them to when they were a kid and they were playing the NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis. It is literally a way to relive your childhood and relive the past. It's the closest thing to time travel that we'll ever get. And even if time travel were a thing, this would be a much better option, because at least when you're playing old games from the past, you get to choose which games you want to play. You don't have to play shitty games from back then, and you don't have to relive your negative past. You get to choose what your past is. While time travel would make you relive your entire past, both good and bad. So I guess the entire point of this video is to show that nostalgia is a very complicated emotion. It's not like happiness, where you know what happiness is. Like, it's very easy to recognize what happiness feels like. It's a positive feeling that makes you feel good. And with sadness, it's just the opposite. And when you think of every other emotion, think of anger, boredom, guilt. They're a lot easier to identify and understand. But with nostalgia, it's so much more complicated. You can be happy and sad at the same time. You can feel happy while looking back at the past, and also feel sad that you can't relive it. Like a drug, nostalgia can fuck with your mind and have serious side effects. And one of those side effects is that you're so stuck in the past, you're so fixated on the past, that you can't appreciate what you have in the present. You'll appreciate it 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, but in the now, you do not appreciate it. Only when looking back do you start to appreciate everything, because in the present, it's your responsibility to deal with what's going on right now, but you don't have to deal with the past, because it already happened, which makes you think more about the good things than the bad things about the past. But on the other hand, you can feel guilty about your past actions that you can never forgive yourself and move on, which can lead to a deterioration of your mental state. But that's not to say that nostalgia is always inherently bad. It can be nice to hang out with a group of friends or family and go back and tell your old stories of things that you did years and years ago, especially if you have funny stories to tell. Everyone around you is laughing at how stupid you were back then. So it can definitely be fun to look back at the past in certain cases, and with a lot of friendships and relationships, the past that you share together with another person, it can define your relationship, and it's always nice to look back through all the memories, good and bad. So the whole point of this video isn't to say that looking back at the past is always a terrible thing. You should just look in the now and go into the future and never look back at your memories, because that just sounds like a stupid thing to say. What would be the point of having memories if you can't look back and enjoy them or learn from them? Nostalgia can bring about feelings of joy and happiness and gratitude, but it also has a lot of side effects, and the biggest side effect being that the past becomes glorified and the present is not appreciated. It seems like a lot of people don't appreciate what they have now until it's in the past. The truth is, any one of us can die tomorrow, because tomorrow's not a guarantee. It's within the realm of possibility that this video that I'm making right now is the last video you'll ever see on the channel, because tomorrow I can be walking down the street and get hit by a bus and die just like that. Or never mind myself, the people around me, my family, my friends. If you don't appreciate your relationships while they're happening, you're gonna regret it when those people eventually fade away, when they die, or you just take different journeys in life and never get to see each other. And I can promise you this, because I've been through it myself. If you don't spend enough time appreciating what you have now in the present, because you're too busy glorifying the past and how great things were, and you keep telling yourself things will never be great again, your mental state will go to shit. And in the long term, what's going to end up happening right now, you think of the past in such a positive way about how everything was so great back then. Eventually, the present will become the past, and your nostalgia will turn into grief and pain. Because you're gonna look back at your life right now, but 5 years from now, and say, wow, I really should have appreciated what I had, because the people that were in my life are no longer a part of it. And I should have appreciated it more. Because I certainly feel that way about my past, because I didn't appreciate it. So I hope you guys found something useful out of this video. I know it was a bit of an incoherent, unorganized mess, but something that's been running through my mind lately, and I just wanted to have a platform to get it out there. So I hope you guys liked the video, even though it was kind of morbid and depressing and hardly gaming related. Like, I started making this video thinking it was gonna be connected to gaming. I think I talked about gaming for like a minute, and the rest of it was just philosophy about life and everything. So yeah, I know it was a little weird, but if you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.